Welcome back to the Cover 3 podcast here on CBS Sports. That's Bud Elliott. That's Tom Fernelli. I'm Chip Patterson coming to you live on CBS Sports Network. Thrilled to be back with you. We had a great week giving you all the coverage that you need wall to wall from Big Ten Media Days. And we're here with you on Tuesdays leading up to the season and all the way until we crown the national champion on the mothership CBS Sports Network. Lots to get to today. We're going to look at the beginning of the season, teams, coaches that need to get off to a hot start. A little bit later on, we'll be looking at the CBS Sports 134, which will be released on Thursday. We had to fill out some ballots. So who are the most difficult teams to rank? And Bud Elliott has proposed one of the best pick'ems that you could have for the preseason. We're very excited to do that. But first, let's get into some news. And Bud, I'm going to come right back to you here first, because we have known through multiple different coaches, through multiple different eras, that the Big Cat weekend was one of Auburn's biggest weekends that they have on the recruiting trail. And this past weekend is when Hugh Freeze had his edition of the Big Cat weekend. And we have had a ton of headlines ever since then, most notably 6 commitments in 3 days, a couple of blue chips among the group. And right now the Tigers are all the way up to number 5 in the 24/7 Sports team rankings. But we've been keeping tabs on when this Hugh Freeze Auburn program was going to make the jump. What did you make of their efforts over the weekend?
Look, when you hire Hugh Freeze, you do it because he's going to beef up your roster. He did it at Ole Miss. He did it at Liberty. We know that Hugh Freeze knows how to recruit. You know, he's not a bad coach, but he's a really, really good recruiter. Given the resources that Auburn has, given the hunger that that program has, you see on the screen right now, running a little 13-7 blue chip ratio. So very nice, like a couple of 3 stars they have in this class as well. You know, this year on the field doesn't feel like an all-in year for Auburn. But on the recruiting trail, it's certainly an all-in year, and it feels like they're building towards something eventually. I expect Auburn to pair these last 2 nice high school classes with some real spending in the transfer portal this upcoming offseason to try to make a run for it in 2025.
Yeah,
Tom,
my
what do you
favorite part
make?
of that graphic, though. Oh, sorry, Chip. No, my favorite part of that graphic is how Auburn ranks 5th nationally with its 2025 recruiting class. And it's the 4th ranked class in its own conference in the SEC. So it's like that's the kind of uphill battle that you're always facing in the SEC on the recruiting trail. And that it feels like no matter how well you're doing, there's always going to be 3 or 4 teams still above you on the board. But like Bud was alluding to, this is a very good step for Auburn getting back to competing for SEC championships. And I do think that going into next year, if you're looking at it, it's kind of like the Ole Miss approach that we saw in the transfer portal this year, where the Rebels went really heavy in the portal to beef up their defense, to build a team that they felt could compete in the league and compete for a playoff berth. Auburn's doing a very similar thing. This is the kind of first steps to that, where they're building up a really strong freshman class for next year. And we're probably going to see them kind of plug some roster spots, spend some money in the portal this offseason to really plug any gaps they feel. So that way they can look at the college football playoff in 2025 as something they're targeting.
Yeah, Tom, am I crazy to think that Hugh Freeze is almost doing a little bit of an old school build here? You know, we see so often you land, you flip a roster, you know, we're trying to get this done instant. I mean, do you sense that maybe Hugh Freeze is trying to, with a bigger goal in mind, maybe being a little bit more methodical with this?
I mean, I think if you look at the situation that he inherited while he was there after firing Brian Harsin after a short and largely unsuccessful stint, I think that he felt that, you know, there was something of a build and it wasn't going to be a 1-year process. They were going to really need 2 seasons to get things where they wanted to be, to get to the contention zone as far as competing within the SEC, competing for playoffs. So, yeah, I do think that it's somewhat more traditional in that sense. But I also wonder, with scholarship limits now rising to 105, is this something we're going to see teams do where they're going to put a little bit more emphasis on the high school recruiting than maybe they had been in the last few years during the transfer portal era? As we saw, a lot of teams began focusing on just finding veteran players to plug gaps and maybe ignoring high school a bit. Now I think you're going to see a much more balanced approach. And as far as Auburn, timing wise, this is it.
Let's stick right there. Bud, we had some initial reaction, you know, as soon as the news was starting to get out. You know, there was a 120 proposal in terms of the scholarship limits that were going to be paired with the NCAA House settlement. You know, of course, we are at 85 scholarships under the current system. They end up landing at 105. Do you Do you think that that's going to be like what we're seeing play out here? Do you agree with some of Tom's look at the patience and the way that schools are going to approach this?
I completely, at least as far as it concerns the very top teams in the sport. Now, I think some of your mid-level P4s, some of your certainly your lower level P4s are not going to waste a bunch of extra money in scholarships on guys who will probably just get plucked away by the big P5 or by the upper P4s rather. But I think if you're a Georgia, an Ohio State, a Michigan, an Oregon, an Alabama, somebody like that who can really go out and recruit at the elite level, you do want to take 8 to 10 more high school players per year, probably several more on the line of scrimmage, maybe an additional quarterback per year. Those positions that are notoriously difficult to scout out of high school, I think you want to have the numbers advantage and give yourself that. Bring in those extra bodies, those extra prospects, maybe even guys who aren't even close to being really ready to contribute and scrimmage them at a different time, right? Like run a separate practice with those guys. A lot of schools do this during the spring where they have kind of their acclimation practice with their young squad. You don't really need, 105 guys to run a practice. The NFL gets by just fine with like 70-ish. So you could kind of take your bottom 25-ish developmental guys on your roster you've recruited. The ones who hit, the ones who kill it in the weight program, hit that growth spurt or show real ability early on, you keep them. The ones who don't, like, hey, congrats, you signed with Ohio State, but you're now going to Indiana, right? Or get on the Georgia to South Carolina train. So, yeah, man, there'll be some filtering down, I think, because of this. But I think the biggest schools will sign a lot more high school players.
Tom, what do you think about the reaction that we've heard from some of the coaches? I know Dabo Sweeney steps out saying that it's a very, very sad thing, and I guess as a former walk-on, that's going to be the case. I think about Baker Mayfield was once a walk-on. I think the Stetson Bennett, prior to winning 2 national championships, a former walk-on. Do you put anything into the elimination of walk-ons from college football in the traditional sense?
I mean, are we actually eliminating the walk-on, or are we just kind of changing the definition of what a walk-on is? Because in the settlement that was announced, like football is now an equivalency sport in which you have 105 scholarships, but they don't all have to be full ride scholarships as they have been in previous rules. You can give a kid a half scholarship. That could essentially be what we see happening to the walk-on program, where schools that maybe haven't been as hard, hammering the high school levels hard, maybe like Bud was talking about, the bottom of the Power Four, the mid-tier programs that aren't really investing heavily in the top talent from the high school levels. Maybe they start to use those extra numbers that they weren't able to fill up in the transfer portal on kids that right now would be walk-ons, but instead they'd be showing up and getting a half scholarship, a quarter scholarship, however the schools want to allocate it. So I think it's a little bit, as we've seen coaches do a lot over the years whenever there are any rule changes, a little bit of pearl clutching. I don't know how much we're actually going to see change as far as that's, in reality, in practice. It's just going to be what we call them. Maybe the term walk-ons dies, but what they are doesn't go anywhere.
Totally. And ultimately, I think that we will still see walk-ons, right? At most programs, the ability to get 105 scholarship level players, talents, doesn't really exist. So like if I can use some of my new revenue sharing money that come out of the settlement that gave us the 105 to maybe spend it on 85 guys I really like, I can still run 20 walk-ons. Maybe those guys just come in with the understanding that you are my scout team. Like, you probably won't play, but it is a cool ability to be on the team. You get some team gear, you get to eat at the training table, all that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of guys that just, they love the game of football and they want to keep playing post high school at the university they just decided to go to. So I think we will still see walk-ons at the majority of programs. Very few programs, I think, will actually use 105 full scholarships.
Yeah, and then of course the walk-ons of the coaching staff, the offensive analyst. Okay, we got a big name in terms of offensive analyst, as 24/7 Sports is among the outlets reporting that TCU is targeting Dana Holgorsen for a staff position. Now, Dana Holgorsen, of course, was at West Virginia. He was at Houston. He is now out, but he was at Oklahoma State before that. And look, the way that some of these coaches around Texas and in Big 12 country, I mean, and they cross-pollinate more than anything you're going to be able to see in the South End Spring. But I do think that this is an interesting look specifically at TCU. And so, Bud, I wanted to ask you, because, they've got Kendall Briles in there as their new offensive coordinator. Do you see this as maybe a sense of urgency from Sonny Dykes to assemble all the best minds in a year where the Horned Frogs, and it's 1 year past that dream run? It feels like this is a move where you are trying to make sure that you get the most out of Josh Hoover and that you get the most out of your offense here in 2024.
That's an interesting thought, Chip. One I hadn't really considered. I mean, from my perspective, it's probably pretty cheap because Houston is still paying this guy's buyout from what I believe. But I looked at it more as succession planning, right? If
Mm.
you think about it, Kendall Briles is a guy who it's very well known wants to get a head coaching job. Obviously, I think he's had a little bit of struggles actually finding that. But if they explode this year on offense, I think Kendall Briles very well could get a head coaching job. So having a guy in place who understands the air raid tree. Now Kendall runs a little bit different air raid than what Dana runs, but certainly Sonny is off that tree as well to a certain extent. So just having continuity of scheme, understanding the terminology, and just having another guy there with eyeballs on practice if Kendall Briles did leave, it's probably not a bad thing.
Yeah, I think this is one of those situations where, like, the most voices you can get in the room to kind of figure things out, the better off you are. And Dana Holgerson has plenty of experience as a head coach and got, building offenses and designing offenses. So I think it's a value to have. And I think more than Sonny Dykes kind of, going all in on his coaching staff for this season, I think this is just kind of a new trend that we're going to see continuing in the sport. We've already seen the beginning with the rule changes and how you can construct your staffs and what those analysts and assistants are now allowed to do as far as on-field roles, recruiting, and all that kind of stuff. You're going to see a lot of coaches that, like Bud was alluding to, who are currently living that buyout life, who are just kind of bored, saying, yeah, I'll take an analyst role for a little bit of a lower salary if I can just get in there and keep my name in and maybe, have my name in the hat for another job when it opens next year. So I think you've seen this. You're seeing it at TCU right now. You saw it at Texas a couple years ago when they hired former TCU coach Gary Patterson for a similar spot, and you're seeing it all around the country. Nick Saban has been running the Alabama School for Wayward Coaches for a few years before he decided to retire, and he's helped rehab the image of a lot of coaches who quote unquote failed at their previous stops. So I think this is just another in a long line, and it's going to continue for a while.
Yeah, no, sir. It's I'm assistant to the coach. I'm not actually a coach. I'm an assistant to the coach. So yeah, let's keep having those buyout checks coming without any offset language. Well, coming up on the other side, the season will be here before you know it. And there are some teams and some coaches that absolutely have to get off to a good start. Who are they and what are the implications? We'll get into all that and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast on CBS Sports Network. Listen, every coach in America wants to get off to a good start. That is not unique. But there are some coaches and some teams that, based on schedule and circumstance, absolutely need to get off to a good start. So, with a question that we have decided is, who needs a September to remember? Tom, I'm going to throw this to you first. Who have you got your eyes on in one of those pivotal opening months to the season?
Yeah, I don't know if you guys saw the exciting news earlier today, but Tyson Foods, one of the bigger boosters for Arkansas athletics, released their Razorback Bites, which are just chicken nuggets in the shape of an Arkansas Razorback. The excitement over John Calipari taking over the basketball program. There's not nearly as much excitement over Sam Pittman and the football program right now as Pittman enters the 2024 season on one of the hottest seats in the country. And if you look at the schedule and how things break down for Arkansas to open the year, they really, really need to get off to a quick start because there's there's not a lot of runway on this schedule. You starting off, you've got that Arkansas Pine Bluff game, which, if if you lose that, you might not get to week 2, Sam. But then you've got Oklahoma State on the road, the UAB at home, and then you've got Auburn on the road and Texas A&M at a neutral site at Jerry World in Arlington. You're looking at a situation where this team could very easily be 2-3 to start the season, going into a bye before you get that Tennessee game, and you have to wonder, will Pittman even be there for the Tennessee game, or will they wait until after it's over to make the move because they don't want to risk Arkansas doing something crazy and maybe pulling off an upset of the Vols? But that month of September, as well as that week 0 game in August, those are crucial for Arkansas, not just for Pittman's, his chances to survive the season, but for their chance to get to a bowl game, if that is ultimately the goal that they have. So it's got to be a September to remember for Sam Pittman and the Hogs.
I am intrigued to see what their run game looks like. I mean, Taylon Green, who they got from Boise in the offseason as a transfer, he has some real, I'm not going to say Vince Young talent, but Vince Young style in like the way that he's a strider. When I watched those Mountain West defenders, they thought they had an angle on him, and then it's like, oh, he's actually moving much faster than he looks like he's moving, which is kind of like what Vince Young had. I think they have pretty good backs there. I know for a fact Arkansas thinks it has upgraded its offensive line, so we'll see if that comes to fruition, and a pretty experienced defense. So, Tom, I could actually see them starting fast, man. It's gonna be fun.
Yeah, there's a certain name here for Arkansas that I think is really important. He's done all right with some run games and some running quarterbacks. It's Robert Petrino. That's right,
Oh,
because with Bobby Petrino taking over, and you go get a quarterback in Taylon Green, who's got the ability to have a little dual threat to him, a lot of shiftiness. It is the most unique head coach on a hot seat coordinator scenario that you have the former Arkansas head coach, disgraced as he was on the way out the door. If you were to make a midseason move on Sam Pittman, hello, we've got somebody who knows exactly how to talk to the media, exactly how to handle the meetings. So the Sam Pittman, Bobby Petrino, who needs who more, and what the results might lead to, easily a storyline that I think is kind of being slept on. I know that we made a big deal of it when Petrino was hired, but something to keep an eye on as it pertains to the Razorbacks. Kind of excited to see how that plays out. Yes, Tom?
Do you think there's like actually a chance that maybe Bobby Petrino, who I know is of the utmost and highest character, as we have seen throughout his career as a college football coach, do you think there's a chance he would sandbag to like, kind of hurt Sam Pittman's chances because he knows he is that close to the head coaching role?
No, because you need them to be bought in to even, like, you can't tell them to sandbag and then in the middle of October ask a team that's about to hit the transfer portal to start trying, right? Like you need them to be bought in from the beginning. So if it happens, it happens. But I don't think Petrino would sandbag him. I hold him in too high regard, I guess. We'll see. But who do you got your eyes on that needs a strong September?
I'm going to go with Colorado. So Colorado's a team that is very reliant on the top half of its roster. Shador Sanders, Travis Hunter. They brought in a number of other transfers this season. I think some of them are actually pretty decent players. They open, as you see, North Dakota State, Nebraska, at Colorado State, Baylor, and then it gets tough. I think they are underdogs pretty decidedly, in fact, in 6 or 7 of their final 8 games. So if they're going to make the college ball playoff, like Dion said they would on Good Morning America, they're really going to need to start fast. And if they have a more reasonable goal, like, I don't know, make a bowl game or maybe make a bowl game comfortably by Thanksgiving, then they're also going to need to start fast. So, given their lack of depth overall up and down the roster, if they don't start fast, then they should be booking some tee times come December because they won't make a bowl without a fast start.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation because like Colorado has that low floor, kind of high ceiling variance depending on how things go with their best players, if they can stay healthy, if all those transfers that they brought in this year to replace the guys they brought in last year kind of gel and figure things out. But you also have to wonder, like you're saying, but if they get off to a slow start and they get to the second half of the season and it starts looking a lot like what we saw last year, where they kind of shocked the world with those early wins and then the wheels fell off. Shadur's in his final season. We know he'll be going to the NFL after the year's over. We know Travis Hunter will be going to the NFL after the year's over. Like, would Colorado, how do they handle the Dion situation with the question marks of, do we know if he's planning to come back for year 3? I know he has said repeatedly that he's coming back, but there's still the question mark of whether he truly means it and how bought in, based on the way they've gone about building this roster, how bought in he is to the long-term project of kind of building Colorado into a Big 12 contender. So this is one of those situations where you're right. If they get off to a really slow start, it's going to bring forth a lot of questions that we haven't really considered yet as to what the second half of the season will look like and also what 2025 and beyond is going to look like for the Buffaloes.
Yeah, strengths and weaknesses. And last year, finishing the season strong was a weakness. And now it is only going to get more difficult with one of these stronger schedules. And I mean that not in the good way for Colorado when it comes to the end of their schedule. But I've got my eyes on, similar to Sam Pittman, another SEC coach who finds himself facing immense pressure and is in the center of a lot of hot seat conversations, and that is Billy Napier and the Florida Gators. Because, there is a talent level on this Florida team that does not connect with what the expectations are in terms of the odds makers and the win total. There is a talent level on this Florida team that, against most of the other schedules in the country, would lead them to a bowl game, if not a respectable record at the end of the year. But that ain't the schedule that Florida faces in 2024. Count them up: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 power conference teams, as they get Miami in the non-con, they get UCF in the non-con, and of course, their rival Florida State. You have to go up against Texas. You have to go up against Ole Miss. These are teams that were not previously on the schedule. Texas A&M as well, another former SEC West team. This is the most difficult schedule in the entire country. But going back to the idea of the talent level, those games in September are not unwinnable. Those games in September are games that the Gators could win. You could enter the month of October and maybe you're undefeated. Or you could enter the month of October and you could find yourself 2-3. So when I see what's ahead of the Gators, it is just what a challenge for Billy Napier to be able to get that group to play at their highest possible level. Because when I look at the end of the schedule, I see 5 likely losses. So you got to get them at the beginning of the year, because it's going to be a lot tougher to get them at the end of the year, especially if you've had those setbacks early.
I mean, Chip, I think you nailed it. Like, Florida feels like it'll be a better team. The schedule is really tough, but A&M also feels like it's a better team. Tennessee also feels like it's a better team. Mark Stoops has come out and said, like, this is the biggest, strongest, fastest team that we've had here in my time at Kentucky, and all the other nice things that he said about their team, yesterday during media thing. Georgia feels like they are probably better. Florida State takes a step back. Ole Miss thinks it's the best team they've had, in half a century. So this is definitely a challenging schedule. Florida's president did recently step down to help his wife with her health concerns. Obviously, we wish them well. That actually could help Billy Napier's job security, by the way. Like, if you're going to fire Billy Napier, you probably have to fire the athletic director. And I don't know who's firing the athletic director if you have an interim president. A lot of times interims don't want to deal with something like that. But you need to at least get to some kind of record where you can sell some sort of belief for the future. If you go 3-9 or 4-8, I don't think it matters who the president is. You're gone.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys saw Billy's comments earlier today about winning with high character guys and how he feels that you can win with high character guys, and they plan to prove it. I maybe Billy got confused about what that 2008 Florida Gators roster looked like. He thinks that Tim Tebow was the only player on it and forgot about the rest of the depth chart. But it is going to be interesting to see, because this is a tough test. Because, Bud, you're right. Everybody in the SEC feels like, for the most part, they are in a better position than they were last year. Or at least everybody on Florida's schedule feels like they're in a better position than they were last year. So this is a really difficult challenge for Napier and the Gators. It's one of those situations where I think this team is a lot better. I just have no idea if that's actually going to play out in the win-loss record.
Must see TV right as soon as the season gets started, beginning with that much anticipated game against the Hurricanes in the Swamp. Well, coming up on the other side, the CBS Sports 134 will be released later this week. Tom and I had to fill out ballots, and there were teams that we had no idea where to place. So with Bud's help and each other, we're going to try to figure out what's up with some of these mystery teams. All that and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. Well, the CBS Sports 134, and I'm biased when I say this, is the best ranking in the entire world of any college football team possible. We release it at cbssports.com. You can find it on the CBS Sports app. And we are some of the voters who have to fill out ballots for this ranking. And coming up on Thursday, there will be the release of the preseason CBS Sports 134. Our ballots were due at 9 a.m. on Tuesday. And that means that now I'm looking back at it and I mean, 1 through 15, sure, but like 15 through 50, I don't know. I haven't seen anything yet. It's a very difficult process. So let's talk it out here, gentlemen. Let's do it. The hardest teams that we had to rank. Tom, I'll let you get first crack at this. Who'd you have difficulty placing in your CBS Sports 134 ballot?
Well, you mentioned the 1 through 15 being easy, and I will agree with you that 1 through 15 is far easier than 16 through 50 and so on. But there was one team that I ended up putting in the top 10 that I was kind of hemming and hawing and going back and forth on. I've got LSU at 10, and I understand there's a lot to like about the Tigers, even with everything that they lost from last year's team. Garrett Nussmeier, we're very high on. We've heard nothing but good things about him, but can he be as productive as Jaden Daniels, who won the Heisman Trophy, was? Malik Neighbors is gone. Brian Thomas is gone. In their places are Kyron Lacey and the kid CJ Daniels, who transferred in from Liberty, who are talented players, but haven't really had that kind of big role yet. So it's like offensively, they're going to be fine. But have you heard anything about this defense that they've changed in the offseason that makes you think this team is going to be significantly improved on that side of the ball? Because they were awful on the defensive side of the ball last year. So when I'm trying to figure out, is this truly a top 10 team? There are so many questions about the Tigers that I don't think many of the other teams in the top 10 I really have. So I put them in there because they're LSU and I expect them to be good. But I have a deep fear in the back of my mind that I could end up looking like a moron come the end of the season.
So, as the number one driver of the Nuss bus, Garrett Nussmeier, the heir apparent to Jaden Daniels, I support LSU being where you have them. But man, like they really failed in the transfer portal this offseason. They're banking on some better health in the defensive secondary. They're banking on some of the young guys on the interior defensive line who I don't think are actually all that good. And they're banking on bringing in Blake Baker, the defensive coordinator who they stole from Missouri, obviously a Louisiana native and a guy who gets to come home and also gets $1.75 million to come coach LSU's defense. But, I mean, how much better can he make these players? It's possible that they show real improvement, but pricing them at 10 or inside the top 10 is basically you're saying, hey, I think Nussmeier is the goods, which I do, but I think a lot of the country may have some questions.
10-3 last year, finished at number 12 in the final AP poll. I look at some of those other teams, and if you believe in Nussmeier, I've got no problems with it. Tom, I had LSU at 8. And that was like maybe a little bit closer to the ceiling of where I could have had them. After I think about 6, I started to have to pick and choose my spots. But we just saw LSU win 10 games, winning almost all 10 of them 45-42. So do I think that even with zero improvements when it comes to the LSU defense, could they still go out there and win 9 and 10 games, which to me, is probably about on par with that kind of range in the rankings? A difficult team, sure, but I've got no problem with that right there. And I clearly am somewhat in lockstep with your thinking. Speaking of ceiling and floor, Auburn was capable of having Alabama at 4th and 31, 4th and a mile, as Brad Nessler said during his call of the Iron Bowl before Jalen Milroe completed the Gravedigger touchdown pass. We also had Auburn hanging tight with Georgia. But, Bud, we also saw Auburn lose at home to New Mexico State. So Auburn was this Jekyll and Hyde team, and we opened this show talking about their recruiting success at the Big Cat Weekend. But, man, I mean, is Auburn a team that you think that they should rank closer to their ceiling or to their floor? I mean, what is a fair read of the Tigers going in to the 2024 season?
So the things about which I'm confident for Auburn for this year, I think their pass catchers are much better. I'm confident that they think Peyton Thorne is better than most of the options out there in the transfer portal. But also that this team is not a team that is ready to make an enormous jump because otherwise they would have supplemented with pieces from the transfer portal, like the teams that are in win now mode, a la Ole Miss, Hugh Freeze's former school did. I'm also quite confident that Hugh Freeze will not have his team ready to compete every single week. He will have them really up for some of the biggest games, and they will flop in some games that they should not flop in because that's literally what this guy's track record is. Like they lay eggs under Hugh Freeze at Auburn so far, and definitely at Ole Miss. Also, Liberty kind of did the same thing despite a ridiculous talent
Yep.
advantage when he was here and a top quarterback. So, uh, yeah, I'm sure Auburn will challenge some of the top teams, and they'll probably also get upset or come very close to being upset in a game that they have no business talent wise losing.
Yeah, a couple things I am confident in when it comes to Auburn, which I had at number 38 on my ballot chip, is that the defense will be good as long as they stay healthy. They have a very top end as far as talent wise on that unit. I don't know how much depth there is, but as long as they stay healthy throughout the season, they'll be one of the better defenses in the league, one of the better defenses in the country. I also agree that the wide receivers are an improvement over what we saw last year, although that's something of a low bar to clear with what we saw from that offense. And while Bud, you said the coaches are confident that Peyton Thorne is better. I am also confident that Peyton Thorne is not very good. And I just think that last season, the receivers were a problem, but I feel like they were kind of being thrown under the bus for a lot of the problems Peyton Thorne had. I just don't see him as being a quarterback with a very high ceiling. And I think that really does limit how good Auburn can be when that is the option. And I was legit shocked that they didn't hit the portal to find an improvement somewhere. But clearly, Hugh Freeze believes in him. That coaching staff believes in him. At least they believe in him enough not to spend too much in the portal. So I think Auburn is solidly a top 40 team, but I can also see a scenario in which this team completely bottoms out if they get hit with injuries and they don't have many answers. So it's a tough call for me too, Chip. But like I said, I got him at 37, and I don't feel like I'll feel too bad about it come the end of the season.
Got 32, and that feels like the highest. That feels like me
Mhm.
being as optimistic and sort of talent forward as possible. When the talent doesn't match the execution, I'll drop you below Rutgers and Maryland, which, by the way, are my 39 and my 40. Like I think that I am coming into this thinking like, okay, year two, Hugh Freeze. Like if we need to have something a little bit more consistency, you should know what you have on that roster. So yes, somewhere in the 30s seems to be where we're at. And that might be an appropriate ranking for Auburn. Again, on Thursday, CBSSports.com and the CBS Sports app. Be sure to check out the CBS Sports 134, our comprehensive ranking of every single FBS team. Well, coming up on the other side, Bud Elliott has put together something that anyone who's ever done a pick'em pool, for a golf tournament or anything like that, you understand. You've got the little boxes. You can only make one choice per box. Well, Bud's got a playoff pick'em pool, and we're going to sit down and we're going to make our selections. All that and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. Bud, I'm going to let you set this up, but you've set up a pick'em pool for the college football playoff. We've got 7 different categories. We're all going to make our selections. What sort of had you setting up this activity in terms of looking ahead to the 2024 season?
Sure. Betting. Honestly, I was like, okay, who are truly priced correctly in the market and who was not? Like if I'm going to lay minus 600 on a team, like we'll see in our first category, like who would I rather lay it on? Who are kind of the mid-level teams that might be slightly mispriced in either a positive or negative direction, and maybe who are the true long shots that we should be keeping in mind? Like they're probably not going to make it, but are they actually priced correctly? It's a lot like how I had Oklahoma State last year at 60-1 to win the Big 12. Now they didn't do it, but luckily we hedged against Texas because I realized it was a schedule-based bet, not a talent-based bet, and got out with a nice little profit. So let's play this thing. I think it's kind of good to illuminate why we do it and like why you make the choices as much fun it is to just make the choices.
Okay, so group number 1, Georgia or Ohio State. Tom, you first. Who are you taking?
Well, I mean, I think in reality, both end up making the college football playoff. But as far as if I'm having to pick between one of the two, I'm taking Ohio State simply because if you look at Georgia's schedule, there are a lot more landmines on it than there are than on Ohio State's, where yes, they've got Michigan, yes, they've got Oregon, but they're going to be heavily favored against nearly everybody else in that league by two, maybe sometimes three touchdowns. And sure, on the other side of that coin, Georgia maybe gets a little more leeway from the committee if they fall short of the SEC championship and lose a couple of games. But I just don't see a scenario in which the Buckeyes bottom out and lose three or four times this year. I think that at worst, they're going to be a 10-2 season and that they're going to get in the college football playoff regardless of whether or not they get that first round bye by winning the Big Ten. So give me the Buckeyes.
But
Yeah, I went with the Ohio State here as well, and really Tom's right. Like both these teams are overwhelmingly likely to make the playoff. They're both both priced as like an 80 or 90% probability to make it in. But I was like, okay, how could they miss? And one thought was quarterback injury. I do think that Ohio State is much more quarterback injury resistant due to the depth in the room and the schedule than Georgia is. Remember, Georgia lost backup Brock Vandagriff. He's now Kentucky's starter or presumed starter, whereas Ohio State has a couple guys who they may not be good, but they're probably at least decent, including quarterback Julian Sayin, the freshman, and then Devin Brown, who we saw very briefly in the bowl game before he got hurt. So uh, I think Ohio State is more likely to survive bad luck on the injury department.
come on now. We're going with the Georgia Bulldogs here. Ain't no way that Kirby Smart squad is going to get left out of the college football playoff invitational 2 years in a row. Come on now. We've seen too many things just happen to work out when it comes to the college football playoff invitational. And I just think that if you're going to pick between these two, you've got a better QB1 at Georgia than you do at Ohio State. I think that you have a team that is built out, maybe not as top heavy, but more in terms of the way that the development has gone. So I hear why you're saying it, but I'm going to go with Georgia. All right, group number 2, Oregon or Texas. Bud, what'd you take?
I took Oregon. I thought Oregon to make the playoff was one of the better picks out there, honestly, and I think they should be like the clear number 3 team in terms of likelihood to make it. I don't really see any real weaknesses at this point on their roster. I think the schedule sets up extremely favorably for Oregon to go at least 10-2, and I think 10-2 makes them, given the amount of preseason hype and sort of the stickiness that we see with preseason polling, basically a lock to make it if they go 10-2.
Yeah, I think both of these teams are really good and they're similar in a lot of ways, but I'm with you. But I'm also taking Oregon from this group because you can look at the quarterbacks and you could say Dylan Gabriel is an injury risk because he's had injuries. You can look at Texas and say Quinn Ewers is an injury risk because he's had injuries. And Quinn has Arch Manning behind him. But kind of going back to what I was saying when I took Ohio State over Georgia, Oregon also has a lot fewer landmines on that schedule than Texas is going to have to get through the SEC. So I think if you look at the roster talent wise, this team is absolutely stacked. I think they're very strong on both lines of scrimmage. I think they have excellent skill position players in offense, and I think they have good players in that secondary for the Ducks. So it's a complete team. Texas, I think, is also a complete team, but the schedule gives me the slightest edge for the Ducks.
UNITY, UNITY. That's right. We got our first Latifah of the season. Clean sweep. Because, yeah, I'm going with the Ducks as well. It is the most talented roster in Oregon football history. It is built from homegrown player development as well as transfer portal. I just don't see a way that Oregon is not going to be able to get through this, like Bud said, at being at 10-2 or better. Texas, we have the highest of hopes based on where things were last season, but where things were last season was even a big jump from where they were the season before. Oregon's been knocking on that door each of the last 2 years. I think the Ducks break through this season. All right, tier number 3, 3 options: Notre Dame, Penn State, Ole Miss. You can only pick one. Who's it going to be, Tom?
This was not an easy choice for me between these 3 teams, and it kind of came down to I think all 3 are going to make mistakes, and I think all 3 they're going to lose at least one game where maybe you're not supposed to lose. But the difference is if Notre Dame loses a game it's not supposed to lose, it's not getting an at-large and it can't win the conference. If Penn State loses a game it's not supposed to lose, I don't see as many opportunities on that schedule for them to kind of boost their resume. Ole Miss loses a game it's not supposed to lose, that means it's probably won a game that it wasn't supposed to win as well. So I think that resume-wise, come the end of the season, the Rebels will have a higher probability of getting in simply because of their strength of schedule, their conference, and also the fact that I do believe a lot of the moves that the Rebels made this offseason, particularly to shore up the defensive side of the ball, are going to pay dividends. And a team that over the last few years has been very good at beating up on the bad teams in the SEC and has fallen up short against the elite squads, I think they're going to be a lot more competitive in those games. It doesn't mean I think they're going to win a bunch of them, but I think that close losses to Georgia and close losses to Oklahoma and LSU and Florida, if they lose those games, will do them a lot better as far as a potential at-large berth. So I would take the Rebels of these three.
I went with Ole Miss as well. And the main reason is because they're going to get credit for an SEC schedule when they really don't play a schedule that is particularly difficult at all. I mean, Furman, Middle Tennessee, Wake Forest, Georgia Southern, and then Kentucky, South Carolina, Arkansas, Florida, Mississippi State. How many of those teams are actually going to make a bowl? Georgia's certainly very tough. LSU in Death Valley is tough, and Oklahoma at the Grove is tough. But, they're favored in 9 or maybe even 10 games. So I do think that Ole Miss is the pick here because they're going to get that extra little committee boost for being in the SEC, as we've seen so many times, despite the fact their schedule's not actually very tough.
Come on, y'all. The answer's right in front of you. Okay. And it ain't Notre Dame. You throw them out. No. And it's not Ole Miss. No, it is the team that is not a group of mercenaries, right? Because Ole Miss, I can see things falling apart because a bunch of them just met each other in January or just met each other in May. We talked with James Franklin on CBS Sports Network about his approach to a roster where he has not been heavy transfer portal, where he is confident in the way they've recruited and the way they've developed. I like Penn State as my pick to be able to be the one of that group. Again, Notre Dame, Penn State, Ole Miss. Give me the Nittany Lions as the team that I would want to saddle up with to make the playoff. All right, we are 3 categories down. We got 4 categories left. And coming up on the other side, a very interesting part of the pickup. You've got Alabama, Michigan, and LSU, but you can only pick one. They're all former national champions. Who are we siding? Next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network, playing a little game. Give you a couple teams. You can only pick one to make the college football playoff. Bud, your options are Alabama, Michigan, or LSU. Who are you going with?
I am going to go LSU. Driver of the Nuss Bus. I believe a lot of the important games at home. Give me the Tigers.
Tom?
I'm going to take Michigan. I don't know if you guys remember, the Wolverines won the national title last year, and I know there have been a lot of changes, but that is still an elite defense, and I still think they'll be able to run the ball. That worked pretty well for them last year.
Yeah, they're going to smash their way to 10-2 at worst, and then Michigan going 10-2 at worst. That's going to be in the college football playoff. I could see a 9-3 or 8-4 for both the other two. I agree. All right, Florida State, Tennessee, Missouri, Clemson, Bud.
Florida State, D ends and corners. They've got it, and they got a 24-year-old at quarterback. I think they'll be okay.
Tom?
I'm going to take Clemson simply because they have that winning pedigree, and they're so good. They don't even need the transfer portal. They believe in the guys they got. And I also think year 2 of Garrett Riley in that offense, they'll take a step forward on that side of the ball.
Yeah, talk about the Knowles. Let's go Pat Payton, ACC Defensive Player of the Year. All right, next crew, Utah, Texas A&M, Kansas State, USC, Liberty, Boise. Bud, who you got?
I am going with, who did I pick? Oh, I picked Boise because I think they are probably at least a touchdown better than every team in the Mountain West. And the committee will look for any excuse not to put Liberty in.
I'm taking Utah, though. That is, you've kind of, coerced me there with that thought. I feel like that might be right. But I just look at Utah and I'm like, this is a team that could easily win the Big 12. And if Utah wins the Big 12, it's in. So give me the Utes.
I am with Boise State as well. I think the Mountain West is the highest rated Group of 5 conference. I think they will have phenomenal competition. And I think Boise State wins that conference. And I think that will get the Broncos into the playoff. Well, if you want more of the Cover 3 podcast, we got it for you, baby. Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, 11 a.m. Eastern time. Come watch us at youtube.com/Cover3 and download the Cover 3 podcast wherever you get your podcasts.